Memphis, 1973. Elvis Presley sat alone in the studio at 3 a.m., writing lyrics he knew would never see the light of day. His hand trembled as he wrote about the one mountain he could never climb, the one battle he could never win, the one thing that fame and fortune and talent could never conquer. These weren't lyrics for a hit song. They were a confession, a desperate attempt to put into words the internal struggle that was slowly destroying him. His producer found the pages the next morning, tucked inside Elvis's notebook, and was shocked by what he read. These lyrics revealed the truth Elvis had been hiding from the world, that despite conquering every external mountain, from poverty to superstardom, there was one internal mountain he could never climb, and it was killing him. Elvis Presley wrote constantly throughout his life, but most people don't this. Between recording sessions, during sleepless nights, on tour buses and in hotel rooms, Elvis filled notebooks with thoughts, prayers, poetry, and song lyrics that he never intended to share publicly. Some were spiritual reflections influenced by his deep Christian faith. Others were raw, unfiltered expressions of pain that Elvis couldn't articulate any other way. In 1973, during one of the darkest periods of his life, Elvis began writing what those close to him called his mountain lyrics. The pages were discovered by Felton Jarvis, his longtime producer, who'd come to the studio early to prepare for a session. Elvis had been there all night, unable to sleep, and had left before dawn. On the piano bench sat his notebook, open to pages covered in Elvis's distinctive handwriting. The lyrics spoke metaphorically about climbing mountains, but anyone who read them understood they weren't about actual mountains. They were about Elvis's struggle with something far more difficult, himself. The words described a man who could see the summit clearly, who knew exactly where he needed to go, but whose feet were too heavy to take the next step. A man who desperately wanted to change, but couldn't find the strength. A man trapped at the base of a mountain, looking up, knowing he was running out of time. Felton was shaken by what he read. He'd known Elvis for years, had watched him struggle with prescription drug addiction and the pressures of fame, but these lyrics reveal the depth of despair he hadn't fully understood. Elvis wasn't just sad or tired, he was giving up. The mountain he couldn't climb wasn't fame or success or artistic achievement. It was recovery. It was healing. It was becoming the man he wanted to be. When Felton tried to talk to Elvis about the lyrics later that day, Elvis deflected. "Just some thoughts I was working through," he said dismissively. "Nothing important." But Felton knew better. These weren't casual musings. They were a cry for help written in the only language Elvis knew how to speak, music. Over the following weeks, Elvis continued adding to these private lyrics. He wrote about the weight of pills in his pocket feeling heavier than chains, about looking in the mirror and not recognizing the man staring back, about wanting to be free but not knowing how to unlock the prison he'd built around himself. The metaphor of the mountain appeared again and again, this insurmountable peak that represented everything Elvis needed to do but couldn't. Get clean, get healthy, be present for his daughter, stop disappointing everyone who loved him. The mountain is right there, Elvis wrote in one particularly devastating passage. I can see it so clearly. I know the path. I've been told the way 1,000 times, but my body won't move. My will is gone, and I'm so tired of trying and failing that I think I'd rather stay down here in the valley and just stop trying. These weren't the words of someone planning to fight. They were the words of someone surrendering. To fully understand Elvis's mountain metaphor, you need to understand what he was actually fighting. On the surface, Elvis Presley had everything: fame, fortune, talent, millions of devoted fans. But internally, he was trapped in a battle with addiction that he was steadily losing. By 1973, Elvis's prescription drug use had reached dangerous levels. He was taking uppers to perform, downers to sleep, painkillers for chronic issues, and sedatives for anxiety. His personal physician, Dr. Nick, was prescribing massive quantities of medication, and Elvis had other doctors who'd write prescriptions whenever Dr. Nick hesitated. The result was a pharmaceutical cocktail that was slowly destroying Elvis's body and mind. But the mountain Elvis couldn't climb wasn't just about pills. It was about the fundamental inability to change course, even when you know you're headed toward destruction. It was about addiction, yes, but also about the deeper psychological patterns that had made addiction possible. Elvis had been performing, pleasing people, being Elvis Presley for so long that he'd lost touch with who Elvis Aaron Presley actually was underneath all the performance. The mountain represents becoming real again, Linda Thompson, Elvis's girlfriend during this period, explained years later. Elvis knew he'd created this persona, the king of rock and roll, and that persona had become a prison. He wanted to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to be just Elvis, but he didn't know how to do that anymore. Every time he tried to be real, the weight of everyone's expectations pulled him back into the performance. The lyrics Elvis wrote reflected this struggle. He described feeling like an actor who'd played a role so long he'd forgotten his actual identity. He wrote about wanting to remove the mask, but being terrified of what people would see underneath. He confessed that the pills weren't just about managing pain or insomnia, they were about making it possible to keep performing, to keep being Elvis Presley, because being himself felt impossible. One particularly revealing passage described the mountain as having two peaks. The first peak fame, success, recognition Elvis had conquered long ago. That was the easy mountain, he wrote, because climbing it meant giving people what they wanted. The second peak, authenticity, health. Peace required climbing alone, without applause or validation. And that mountain terrified him, because he'd spent his entire adult life measuring his worth by external validation. How do you climb a mountain when you don't know who you are? Elvis wrote, "How do you reach a summit when you're not sure you deserve to be there? I conquered the world but lost myself in the process. And now everyone wants Elvis Presley, but Elvis Presley is exhausted and broken and doesn't know how to become Elvis Aaron again." Throughout 1973 and into 1974, Elvis made several attempts to climb the mountain as he described it in his lyrics. These weren't public declarations or dramatic gestures. They were private attempts to change, to get healthier, to break free from the patterns destroying him. And every one of them failed. The first attempt came in late 1973 when Elvis decided to stop taking pills cold turkey. He told Linda Thompson he was done, that he was going to get clean on his own. It lasted 3 days before the withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, body aches, psychological terror, became unbearable. Elvis went right back to the pills, defeated and ashamed. He felt like such a failure after that, Linda recalled. He kept saying, "I can't even do this. I can't even stop taking pills for 3 days. What kind of man am I?" It broke my heart, because I could see him judging himself so harshly. And that judgment just made him want to escape into the pills even more. The second attempt came when Elvis agreed to see an addiction specialist in early 1974. The specialist recommended a treatment facility, but Elvis refused. He couldn't go to rehab. The press would find out. His image would be destroyed. His career would be over. Instead, he tried outpatient treatment, which meant staying at Graceland while supposedly following the specialist's program. But Elvis had too much access to pills at Graceland, and too many people who would get him whatever he wanted. The outpatient approach failed within weeks. After each failed attempt, Elvis would return to his notebook and add more lyrics about the mountain. The metaphor evolved from describing the mountain as steep but climbable to describing it as perhaps impossible. He wrote about feeling like Sisyphus, the figure from Greek mythology, condemned to roll a boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, forced to start over eternally. Maybe some mountains aren't meant to be climbed, Elvis wrote. Maybe some people are meant to stay in the valley. The most heartbreaking failed attempt came in mid-1974 when Elvis tried to reconnect with his daughter, Lisa Marie, in a meaningful way. She was 6 years old, living in Los Angeles with Priscilla, and Elvis realized he was becoming a stranger to his own child. He invited Lisa Marie to Graceland for an extended visit, determined to be present, to be sober, to be the father she deserved. For the first few days, Elvis managed it. He stayed off the heavy medications, spent quality time with Lisa Marie, was genuinely present. But the insomnia returned. The anxiety built. The chronic pain in his back and legs intensified. By day 4, Elvis was back on pills just to function. Lisa Marie, young as she was, noticed something was off with her daddy. The visit ended early, and Elvis was devastated. That failure hurt him more than any of the others, said Charlie Hodge, one of Elvis's closest friends. He could live with failing himself. But failing Lisa Marie? That destroyed him. After she left, he wrote pages and pages about the mountain, about how he'd let his daughter down, about how he was supposed to be her hero, but couldn't even stay sober for a week. So why couldn't Elvis climb this mountain? Why couldn't a man who'd conquered the entertainment world, who'd overcome poverty and achieved unprecedented success, manage to get clean and healthy? The answer, revealed through his private lyrics and the accounts of those who knew him, is complex and tragic. First, Elvis didn't believe he deserved to climb the mountain. Years of guilt had accumulated, guilt about his mother's death. Gladys had died from heart failure, partly brought on by Elvis's army service taking him away from her. Guilt about his failed marriage to Priscilla. Guilt about being an absent father. Guilt about disappointing the fans who idolized him. The pills weren't just an addiction. They were a form of self-punishment. Getting clean would have required Elvis to forgive himself, and he couldn't do that. Elvis carried the weight of everyone's disappointment, Linda Thompson explained. Every failed relationship, every canceled show, every time he didn't live up to expectations, he internalized all of it. The mountain represented healing and self-forgiveness. And Elvis believed he didn't deserve either. Second, Elvis's entire identity was built on being a performer, a pleaser, someone who made other people happy. Recovery would have required him to be selfish, to put his own health above performances, to disappoint fans by canceling tours, to risk his image by admitting he needed help. And Elvis didn't know how to put himself first. The mountain required him to save himself, but he'd spent his entire life saving everyone else. Third, and perhaps most devastatingly, Elvis was surrounded by enablers who had a financial interest in keeping him performing. His manager, Colonel Parker, needed Elvis working to pay off gambling debts. Dr. Nick needed Elvis as his most famous patient. The Memphis Mafia needed their jobs and lifestyles that came from being part of Elvis's world. Recovery would have disrupted all of that, and not enough people around Elvis were willing to risk their own comfort for his survival. In his final lyrics about the mountain, written in early 1977, Elvis's tone had shifted from determination to resignation. He wrote about accepting that some mountains can't be climbed, that some battles can't be won, that sometimes the bravest thing is admitting defeat. These weren't the words of someone planning to fight. They were the words of someone who'd already surrendered. I think Elvis knew by the end that he wasn't going to make it, Charlie Hodge said. The mountain he couldn't climb was recovery, was life, was believing he deserved to be saved. And once he accepted he couldn't climb it, he just stopped trying. Elvis Presley's private lyrics about the mountain he couldn't climb reveal the tragic truth of his final years. He knew exactly what he needed to do to survive, get clean, get healthy, forgive himself, but couldn't find the strength to do it. The mountain wasn't addiction itself, but the deeper internal battle to believe he deserved recovery. Elvis conquered every external mountain life presented, but the internal mountain of self-forgiveness and healing proved insurmountable. He died at 42, still at the base of that mountain, looking up at a summit he'd never reach. Have you ever faced a mountain you couldn't climb? What internal battles are hardest to fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Elvis's struggle reminds us that sometimes the battles we can't see are the ones that matter most.